Gossiping is frequently considered a shameful occupation, yet ubiquitously conducted, often secretly. With such a stigma, one might wonder why gossip is so common, so let's consider it from an evolutionary standpoint. Evolutionist Robin Dunbar of Oxford University proposes that language evolved as a means of maintaining social bonds through gossip. Dunbar's argument is that one of the pressures that led to the development of the brain is the need to remember all of the people that we know and interact with them in an efficient manner. He suggests that for humans, social gossip fulfills a similar role to that provided by grooming in other primates, as a means of forming bonds between members of a community. This is part of a more general claim that intelligence evolved in order to maintain large group sizes. The more individuals you live with, the more demands are placed on you to keep track of each individual and of the relationships among them. To meet these cognitive demands, he suggests there needs to be an increase in brain size. In analyzing the relative neocortex sizes associated with higher intellectual function, looking across different primates, Dunbar correlated his findings with their social group sizes. He found a strong positive correlation between a primate's group size and neocortex ratio, suggesting that the social brain hypothesis might have some credibility. His measurements and calculations led to the Dunbar number of 150 as a prediction for how many close relationships a human could reliably maintain. While humans today live in a wide size range of groups, many hunter-gatherers do live in bands of between 100 and 200, with a mean of around 150. Consider whether 150 is close to the number of friends you have that might do you a favor if you needed help. But what has this got to do with language? It has been suggested by Dunbar and others that in non-human primates, the social glue that holds a group together is provided by grooming. Many primates, such as baboons and chimpanzees, will groom each other to remove ticks and other parasites from their bodies, but also as a means of forming and maintaining their relationships. The amount of grooming that a primate needs increases in direct relationship to the size of the group of which the individual is a member, and some primates can spend as much as 20% of their entire day engaged in grooming activities. It has been estimated that if humans were to maintain group sizes of 150 individuals by using one-on-one grooming, then they would need to spend half of their available time just on grooming. This figure is too high for us to attend to all the other daytime chores, so Dunbar argues that our ancestors developed a new form of social grooming through using language. Language enables us to engage more than one person in conversation, and we can also talk while performing other activities such as hunting and gathering. Given that the average group size for non-human primates is 50 and that for humans is 150, it follows that if humans are to spend at most 20% of their time engaged in social grooming, language must be 3 times more efficient than one-to-one grooming. Research by Dunbar et al. Indicates that the maximum number of conversational partners that is typically possible is around 3. Dunbar presents some interesting evidence for this language as social grooming hypothesis. Studies of language use suggest that it is most often used for gossiping and other social chit-chat rather than for other means like giving instructions. Dunbar et al. Eavesdropped on people's conversations and calculated that between 60 and 70% of the time, conversations were of a social rather than educational nature. Interestingly, women were no more likely to engage in social conversation than were men, contrary to stereotypes. Geoffrey Miller argues that language was under the control of sexual selection rather than natural selection and evolved as a means of showing off how good our genes are to our prospective partners. At the heart of Miller's argument is Zahavi's notion of honest signaling, that certain phenotypes evolved to accurately indicate our underlying genetic fitness to potential mates and competitors. Miller uses this line of reasoning to explain aspects of human behavior which are useless to direct fitness, such as art, creativity, and also language. Of course, language is not functionless, far from it, but Miller's argument is that language may have originated as a means of enabling the process of competing for a mate. It was only later that it was used for all its other purposes. Miller points to the process of verbal courtship as an example of the importance of language in the dating game. Men, he suggests, are like verbal peacocks using language to impress women during courtship. For their part, women use language less as a tool during mate selection and more as a method for holding an already existing relationship together. Through language, Miller argues, women endeavor to prove to men that they are still the best option and thus try to prevent them from mating with other women. Male ornamentation such as horns or the peacock's tail seem to have evolved to their large size by virtue of their role in influencing female choice. Likewise, the role of language in courtship might have increased its complexity beyond that necessary for mere survival. Research by Miller suggests that males are more than 10 times more prolific than women at producing works of art and are at their most productive when at their peak age of sexual activity. Men also tend to have larger vocabularies than do women and use more complex words. Women, however, score more highly on tests of verbal fluency than men do. This might be seen as evidence against the theory. Surely if men are the ones who attempt to court women through language, then they should have the higher verbal fluency. Miller addresses this anomaly by suggesting that women need good verbal skills in order to choose a good mate by making an accurate judgment of a potential partner's ability. What were the particular pressures that led to our linguistic ancestors being favored over their languageless conspecifics? Language, like the human eye, almost certainly did not evolve as a result of a single huge mutation that led us from having no language to having a full-blown language as we know it today. More likely, language evolved from non-linguistic vocalizations similar to those we see in non-human primates, gradually becoming more complex over the generations. In a way, the question is difficult because there are so many candidates. As biological anthropologist Terence Deacon notes, from the perspective of hindsight, almost everything looks as though it might be relevant for explaining the language adaptation. The aspect of language that language researchers have tended to focus on is information transfer, specifically in its use in coordinating hunting or for teaching other people new skills. Recently, however, this view of what language might have been for originally has been challenged by a number of evolutionists, each of whom argues that language evolved for primarily social reasons. Viewing children as universal novices and children as merely an apprenticeship to adulthood has had a long history in developmental psychology, but has recently been challenged by some evolutionists. The life history approach to development argues that children's behavior should be understood in two ways: as an attempt to maximize their own survival and as an attempt to increase their reproductive fitness for adulthood. A recent paper by Locke and Bogan suggests that we might not view child language as merely a lesser form of adult language, and instead ask what a child's language does for the child and how this might influence their reproductive chances as adults. Locke and Bogan argue that Homo sapiens has a more complex life history involving more stages than our primate relatives. Whereas chimpanzees have infancy, a juvenile, and an adult period, humans have infancy, childhood, a juvenile, and adolescent period, and an adult period. They explain these two extra periods of childhood and adolescence as specific adaptations which are part and parcel of the evolution of language. In a sense, they are claiming that these two extra periods are there to support language. In another sense, they are claiming that language is the very reason we have all of these stages. This is a graph comparing the length of each developmental stage for humans and their ancestors. For example, the average age at which the eruption of the first permanent molar is shown. This is taken as marking the end of childhood and the beginning of juvenility in humans. It shows that humans have a relatively long period of childhood, a short period of juvenility, and, unlike our ancestors, a period of adolescence. Locke and Bogan claim that one reason for these two extra stages is to allow for linguistic competence to develop. In terms of language, childhood is a time of engaging in new extrafamilial friendships. By age 6, the child is physically able to produce the adult range of vowel sounds. This is a period with complex games having a high degree of verbal competition.